Okay, so today's nappings is the project I've been working on for the past few days, side project. And what it is I'm trying to make a cahokia as thin as possible with these dimensions. Right, so I got this one on video, but it's not as thin as possible. That one is about as thin as I can get it with Cook. But I'm going to try again. This is Georgetown. Right, I'm going to try with a heat treat, West Texas heat treat this next time. Okay, so I've been sitting here. Some of these side projects, the reason why they take forever, or for me to get back to them and begin working on them and all that, the reason why they take forever is because some of them require special skills or lots of preparation, pre-practice to get back into napping that type of point. Now, I've been napping bird points and cahokias for years now, so you'd think that I'd be able to get back in the zone really quick, or very quickly, because I've done them a lot of times already. Very thin ones. I had a bunch of very, very thin cahokia points. I sold them all. But yeah, I need to practice up again to get back into thinning these small projectile points. It's a different mindset than thinning a large blade. It takes the same amount of time, the same amount of devotion to the skill of that particular type. But if I was going to sell these, they would sell for 1/2 to 1/3 what the large blades sell for. If that, I think maybe the large blades sometimes sell for 10 times more than these small bird points. Okay. And usually I'll sell a bird point for $15. And you pay like $5 for shipping, $4.80 for shipping or something, so it's about $20 total. If you buy a bunch of them from me, I can stick them all in the same package for $5. Now I'm back ordered. I gotta tell you, I'm back ordered on hunting points pretty deep. And the majority of the ones that I've got on back order are heavy, 165 grain hunting points, heavier than this 150 grain. And I do consider this a hunting point. It's basic. It's wider than 1 inch so that you can resharpen it. Has no notches, so you'll just have to glue it with a strong glue or put your own notches in. Those are the easiest ones for me to make, except for the fact that I need to procure the material. Each one of those hunting points requires a pretty substantial spall, right? Like that big. This is a hunting point spall. It's pretty large, and it's only going to yield maybe 150 grain. If I want to go up higher, 165, 185, 200 grains, I need something even bigger than this. And we're getting into some expense here. Yeah, for a large hunting point, 200 grain or so, I need a spall like this, which is 4 inches long, for what, $15 for the hunting point, right? Whereas if I were to make a biface out of this full amount, without worrying about the weight, without worrying about the shape to match the others in the set. This is about 2 3/8. A 165 grain one is going to be about 3 inches, right? To match it to the others in the set, I'm going to lose a bunch of material off of this, but you know, I need to start with something large, right? And a lot of these are randomly sized, so I can't be too picky. I just got to grab whatever I can fit the hunting point into, and some of them end up being, you know, quite large spalls, like 4 inches or 4.5 inches, just for a $15 hunting point. Whereas if I were to capture as much of this as possible and get a much longer blade than a hunting point, it would sell for 3 times the amount of money. Okay, for the same amount of labor. Okay, with a lot less waste. So the hunting points, one of the reasons why they're so much in demand is because nappers get wise to the truth that the hunting points really are not a good return on investment. They're good practice for the napper, but if you do the math, it's not economical. The ones that are doing a whole bunch of hunting points, still, even with that in mind, are actually doing you a big favor, being very generous. Now with me, I'm not being that generous because it's easier than a point that has notches and fancy serrations and is a copy of a real artifact. The hunting point is easier than doing those. So it's, for me, I can do the hunting points. I don't consider it that I'm doing you much of a favor, but it is less profitable for sure. Alright, just FYI, don't worry about anything. I'm not griping, I'm just letting you know. I'm not saying you shouldn't. If you're a professional napper, I'm not saying you shouldn't make hunting points or discourage you, I should say. I'm not discouraging you. Just keep it in mind. If you're a new guy and you say, yeah, there's an unlimited market for hunting points, I'm just going to make hunting points. Just keep in mind that unless you love the napping of that particular style, it's going to dawn on you eventually that the time or the investment in time and money is not going to be as much as with other styles. So just be aware. All right. I've had guys tell me that, you know what, I'm missing a huge opportunity. There are styles that are so much in demand that no matter how many you make, you can sell them all. Why don't you just do those? Well, for the reasons that I told you. There's more than just the demand. Yes, there is a demand. There's also a big demand for reproductions. I'm finding there's a big demand for just simple blades. I don't know what you guys are doing with them, and I don't really care. Doesn't matter to me what you're doing with them. But it's interesting. Interesting that the demand for simple blades is quite high. Simple blades and bifaces. Thinned. Not thick, but thinned. So that may be the qualifier. Thinning is very difficult. That's maybe why they're in demand. Alright, so with this one here, I'm getting the feel for the stone. It's a tough heat treat, which means it's still requires lots of energy to remove a flake. But I may be able to thin this stuff down. A lot of times when it requires a lot of force to remove flakes, right when you get to the thinnest part of the whole process, you're going to snap it because of the excess energy required. Right, now I should develop a formula for that. Make it more scientific. There is a point. Oh, let's see. How do I say it better than that? There is a stage where the difficulty in removing the flake compared to the tensile strength is vital. That ratio where the difficulty of removing a flake and the tensile strength, that ratio is very important when getting down to very, very thin, a very, very thin state. There's more to getting a thin point than the skill of thinning. It's that physical ratio. You cannot get it thin, no matter how you try, if the force required to remove a flake is such that it will cause too much bending stress, too much stress on the point, no matter how skillful you are. Why does that matter? Well, it matters when you're talking about general statements. Like there's a general statement, if you use raw stone, it'll hold together better for you to make thinner blades. That statement is wrong in general. Specific cases, sure. But in general, it's wrong because what really matters is the force required to remove a flake compared to the tensile strength or the resistance to bending. That will determine how thin it gets. All the skills being equal. You know, your skill being equal from point to point, from material to material. The ones that you're going to get the thinnest are the ones that are going to resist the bending compared to the amount of force required to remove a flake. So yes, there's a lot of raw materials that are very resistant to bending. A lot of raw stone that's very resistant to bending and easily flaked. Those you can get the thinnest. And running the flake too, I don't know if it's a property of the stone. Well, yeah, it has to be. But some stones will allow long, narrow flakes and some won't. The finer the grain, the longer the flakes, I think, right? Thick or grainy material, when you can see the grains, doesn't really allow long flakes in most cases, or at least not the narrow ones. The ones that you can push through and get a long, narrow flake. That's the ideal flake in flintknapping, is a long, narrow one. Not just long, but long and narrow. That's the ideal flake. Those, you are really dependent on the material in large part for that type of flake. Skill, yes, of course, but the material has to cooperate. Okay. Oh, let's see. I'm just going at through random thoughts. I tried to take a nap today so I'd be more awake and alert for this process. I didn't sleep well during my nap. So we'll see how this goes. Now you can tell when I'm awake when I start talking really fast. I was watching some of the other videos. I talk really fast in those. Okay, so let's see. concentrate. This is flaking well, but it's worrying me because, like I said, the flakes do not come off that easily. I need a lot of force. We'll see. Obsidians are good good materials for extremely thin points because of their properties. They have flexibility. It depends on the obsidian though, right? Some obsidian is more flexible than others. My favorite's the triple flow stuff. I don't know why it's so good, but I can get really thin points with that. I can do it with mahogany obsidian too, but mahogany obsidian is kind of tricky. It'll spoil you. It'll be extremely easy to flake, and you'll take for granted that it's very forgiving sometimes on the edge, and you can make long, nice, beautiful flakes without very careful preparation. But then when it'll get you, you start getting lazy and you'll hit a platform that's not prepared right. It puts too much bending stress and it'll snap the mahogany obsidian extremely easily. Any little mistake and it'll snap when it's really thin. The same with all obsidians, basically as a blanket statement, but there are some obsidians that are quite flexible. So if you're going to make really, really thin points, I think you'll get good results with obsidian, high quality obsidian, high quality heat treat, high quality Georgetown. I've had thin points with this high quality. I think this is a West Texas heat treat. I have some thin points, or I made some thin points with this. You can make thin points with high quality root beer church. And you'll notice everything is high quality. High quality has the characteristic of flexibility and ease of removing flakes. So the worst is the opposite. No flexibility and difficulty in removing flakes. Okay. And yes, stone does have a certain amount of flexibility. Very, very little, but it does. Heat treating stone. I think the jury is out on this one. With definitive proof, I don't know if heat treating increases or decreases the flexibility. I think it may be either one, depending on the material. I think some materials get more resistant to bending with heat treating, and some are the opposite. They will snap when bending more easily. I don't know if there's a way to judge that by just testing the material with some sort of device. I doubt it. And even with knapping experience, it's hard to tell. Okay, so the basic preform is here, or I have finished the basic preform. I keep them in the bag so I won't snap the tips off. The bag does protect the tips. I hate snapping the tips off. If I leave them just hanging around, those tips always end up hitting something. But in the bag, they're safer. All right. Let's see. You might ask, well, how did they preserve the tips on these thin points back in the day? Why would they make the tips so delicate if they just break off with almost no effort at all? Even sticking it into a bag or a quiver will snap the tip off. Well, my answer to that is they were not using quivers for the very delicate points. They were holding them in their hand, holding the arrows in the hand, either with the bow or someone else is holding the arrows. You'd have an arrow boy holding the arrows. You wouldn't hold them yourself or put them in a quiver. They had to be exposed so the tips and these arrowheads won't touch anything. Right? Yep. That's what I think. They were not put in quivers. They're always held out in the open. The delicate points. Okay. Alright, so I had some topics lined up that I was wanting to talk about while I do this pressure flaking stuff. But I can't remember what they are. It's funny, my memory is not accessible when I'm doing this stuff. I can remember just fine if I'm not flint-knapping. Let me see. Yeah, there's a topic that I haven't gotten into. Cultural influences on arrowhead making. And I'm not talking only about the artistic aspect, cultural artistic aspect, or the aesthetic aspect, but actually who was allowed or not allowed to make points. Who was actually making the points. For example, Ishii, if I remember correctly, had this belief that if a woman touched his bow, it would not work right unless he cleansed it, which means he needed to do a certain ritual, perform a certain ritual on the bow, and he could use it again. A woman was not supposed to touch the bow. Now, does the same hold true for arrowheads? Well, you can kind of make the assumption that yes, at least in some cultures, somebody probably came up with that idea. Does that affect the way it's made? Well, it affects who makes the points. Because obviously if a woman can't touch the arrowheads, then she's not allowed to make them either. In that particular culture. So that's one thing. Another thing is working with stone may have been beneath certain people in the tribe. So they had the least important members of society making them, or just the opposite. The least important members of society were not allowed to make the arrowheads. There's only a certain elite that were allowed to make these, or to learn how to make these. So I think both extremes were possible and were in existence. Does it make a difference in how they look when this happens? Yep, it does. It makes a difference, I think, if you're an elite person in society and you have the support of everybody, or you would punish them, you can get away with making arrowheads that are not really good. Still be praised for them. Just like modern politicians that have lots of support can make decisions that are not very good, but they still get praised for them, for their stupid decisions. So the elite making arrowheads or knives or whatever, if they weren't high quality stuff, they'd still get praised for them. Now you might be thinking, well, you won't become an elite unless you are the best at whatever it is. Unless you're the best arrowhead maker, you're not going to become one of the elite arrowhead makers. That is true if that's how the culture is designed to reward merit. But in many cultures, you get your merit first, and then everything you do after that is considered good. And how do you gain merit before you display skill? Usually by some sort of religious or political significance. Right? If you can spin a story and convince a lot of people of something and attain positions of power, that'll put you in a credible status in society, right? So-called. And then anything you do after that is divinely inspired or whatever. It's bad looking, it's the way it's supposed to be. As an example, there are many ways the cultures go. They can go in different directions. Alright, so what about the other side of things? The other side of things is what's not usually talked about, where you would have slaves making the arrowheads. People that were dependent on someone else for their food, and they were just supported for this particular skill. But they were slaves, they couldn't do anything else. They had to take orders from somebody. And they were not necessarily the users of the arrowheads. How common do I think that was? I actually think that was fairly common for slaves to be making the arrowheads. Now it makes a difference, right? If you will be punished for not making a good one, quality is going to tend to be on the good side. Although you cannot force someone to be extremely skillful, they'll have to voluntarily take an interest in it. You can't really force someone to be artistic or very passionate about something and produce something of extremely high quality. But you can force someone to become mechanical and do the same work over and over and over again, and then become good at it just by default. Right? So it does affect the way they look. Usually in that circumstance, all of them look very similar. They're following a pattern. Probably not allowed to deviate too much. That sort of thing. And it becomes drudgery for many people in that situation. So if the skill starts to taper off, they take them off making the arrowheads, I guess, and put them on something else. Maybe gathering the stone. Carrying the stone for miles and miles. The labor, the grunt labor involved in gathering stone and stuff can be done by people who are not flint knappers. If they're not flint knappers and they're gathering stone and they're off by themselves or with a crew that also doesn't flint knap, the stuff that they find may not always be the highest quality. They might take a shortcut and just go down the way a little bit and get the local stone instead of traveling to get the good stuff. So quality does suffer in both circumstances, where there's an elite making them or if there's slaves making them. I think in both those circumstances the quality suffers. The best quality, I think, is when the flint knappers are allowed to have some autonomy and have some tolerance from others, to let them do what they consider to be beautiful and very artistic, maybe even compete with each other, friendly competition. And that sort of thing. I think the most beautiful points were probably made in societies that had nappers that were more autonomous. Now, I have a bias in that way. I think freedom allows you to express yourself more instead of having someone directing you. The freedom to pursue what you want makes you more productive and gives you a better end result. Right? But that's just my bias. Being a classical liberal. All right, so that's getting there, getting very regular. I'm going to continue on the next segment.